Here, as Judges chapter 20 is a relatively long chapter, and we have a lot to cover. If you didn't notice, there is a handout at the back on the little small table on your right as you're coming in, or left as you're going out. And we will be in Judges chapter 20 today. But let's open with a quick word of prayer. Dear Heavenly Father, thank you for this day that we can come together to worship you, to open your word, to learn from your word, and to see what you have for us today. I pray for John Laurie as he's bringing the message later today, and for Joanna as she's bringing an update from her ministries. Pray for Pastor Burns as he continues to be sick, and for Christina with her continuing health issues. But praise is so far, the biopsy and such has been very positive with her. Pray for others who might be sick or traveling today, and bless this day. In Jesus' name, amen. All right, so in our overall structure of Judges, we are to the second part of the conclusion, where the theme here in the second part of the conclusion is complete moral and military failure, because Israel has not just failed to remove the Canaanite influence from the Promised Land, they've fully adopted Canaanite ways and have turned their back on God. Now, we talked about in the beginning of this study that the book of Judges is not strictly laid out in a chronological order. It's set up in a thematic order that makes this parallel structure that forms kind of this circle that starts with the introduction with a failure to remove Canaanite influence, with spiritual failure and military failure, and then comes back around to that at the end, but is even worse than where it began. The events that we're going through here in chapters 19 last week, 20 this week, and 21 next week, chronologically, these events likely happen very close to the beginning of the period of Judges. Thematically, they're laid out towards the end. And that in some ways also really emphasizes this kind of circular repetition that occurs in Judges, that we have sin, oppression is brought on Israel because of that sin, and then God raises up a deliverer. And here, last week, we saw some absolutely horrible sin occurring in Israel. And as a result of that, Israel ends up oppressing themselves. In the conclusion, there is no oppression from an outside foreign Canaanite influence. At this point, Israel's become not only the source of the sin and the source of ignoring God, but also the source of the oppression, which kind of comes almost full back circle to the beginning. We'll talk more about that next week. Judges 19 through 21 all work together in the second half of the conclusion to form this kind of parallel narrative that started last week with violence abuse against a woman, namely the Levite's concubine. This section ends in chapter 21 with violence against many women. In between, in chapter 20, which is where we are today, we have now, with this oppression internally of Israel, Israelites turning on each other and killing other Israelites. And in the next week, when we look at chapter 21, we'll see kind of in the center of this some foolish vows that the Israelites make that then result in them killing more Israelites. And so some questions we've looked at through Judges is what's wrong with the picture and what does this tell us about God? This whole sequence in 19 through 21, everything's wrong with the picture. Things have just spiraled down in Israel to the point where just everything's wrong with the picture. Now, in chapter 20, kind of a quick casual look at it might lead one to think that, well, things are kind of getting better. I'll be back to that in a moment. In that it starts with Israel gathering to deal with sin. That sounds good. It has Israel at the end defeating the source of that sin, Benjamin, the tribe of Benjamin. In between, Israel actually consults God. That sounds good. Israel comes together and is unified. It is one of the few, it's actually the only time that's recorded in the book of Judges since Joshua's death that all of Israel comes together unified. That all sounds good. But when we look at the details, we're going to see it's not that good. There's a lot wrong with how they're dealing with the sin. There's a lot wrong with how they're consulting God and why they're consulting God. And everything is backwards and wrong. Going back a slide. Geographically, as far as where we'll be, basically the same region we were in last week with chapter 19 is this chapter 20 focuses around the area of Gibeah in the tribal region of Benjamin. So north of Jerusalem, south of Bethel. Bethel also comes into play as being the place that currently the Ark of the Covenant is. And in chapter 20 is the first mention, and pretty much the only mention, of the Ark in the book of Judges. Whereas in Joshua, the Ark was seen more prominently. And that's somewhat indicative of the difference in the spiritual standing of the Israelites under Joshua's leadership versus in the book of Judges. So kind of the central area there of Israel. So this is on the handout there, and we're going to go through this as far as kind of an outline of the major events in Judges chapter 20. Before we get into the details, going to do kind of a bird's eye overview of this. This passage, this narrative starts with Israel gathering without their brother Benjamin. And it ends with Israel almost being completely without their brother Benjamin because of the destruction that they've done to Benjamin. There's only 600 Benjamite men left by the end of this chapter. So it starts with this almost unification of Israel, but Benjamin is not invited, and it ends with Benjamin almost being wiped out. In between, there's some preparation for battle and battle, both in the part of preparation on the part of the Israelites and the Benjamites. And kind of in the middle, there is an appeal to Benjamin by the Israelites. It sounds good, but when we look at the details, we'll see it's still not quite right. So let's take a look at the details of this, starting in Judges chapter 20, verse 1. So all the children of Israel came out from Dan to Beersheba, Dan being the northernmost part of the promised land, Beersheba being the southernmost part. And often throughout the Bible, when talking about the entire region, Dan to Beersheba is mentioned as the northern and southern boundaries, and then Gilead being the Transjordan western territory off there. This is the first time in the book of Judges that the land is referred to in its entirety by these terms. As well as from the land of Gilead. And the congregation gathered together as one man before the Lord at Mizpah. And Mizpah would be kind of in the border between Benjamin and Ephraim there, a little bit west of Bethel, and kind of northwest of Jerusalem. This is not the same Mizpah. Oops, I'm going backwards. This is not the same Mizpah that showed up in the account of Jephthah, which would have been further north of this. It's a different Mizpah. And so the leaders of all the people, all the tribes of Israel, well, except Benjamin, who wasn't invited, presented themselves in the assembly of the people of God. 400,000 foot soldiers who drew the sword. Now the children of Benjamin heard that the children of Israel had gone up to Mizpah. So even though Benjamin should be part of the tribe of Israel. Benjamin has been singled out and not invited to this, but Benjamin recognizes, the tribe of Benjamin recognizes that Israel is massing this huge army. This is the largest army that Israel has put together in the entire book of Judges. 400,000 soldiers. So already, in the way that Israel is approaching this, Benjamin has been kind of singled out as an outsider. And we have this very, very, very large army that is being put together. Think of what the tribe of Benjamin must be thinking. They must be thinking, Israel's about to go to war without us. Maybe against us. And that's going to kind of set the tone for Benjamin's response here. Because even before the Levite has given testimony here, even before God has been consulted, Israel's already taking decisive action in building a huge army in response to the dismembered parts of a human being that were sent out by the Levite. So kind of interesting here, this unification of Israel was started by the Levite sending out a dismembered human body. And this event is going to start the dismemberment of the tribes of Israel here. So the children of Israel, after they've gathered, say, tell us, how did this wicked deed happen? So the Levite is there, and they ask him, how did this wicked deed happen? Now, at this point, we don't know for sure what they're referring to as wicked deed. They may be referring to the fact that body parts have just been dispersed among Israel. Or they may have gotten a message along with it to know what happened at Gibeah as far as the abuse, rape, and consequence murder of this woman. We don't know exactly what evil deed they're talking about. So in verse 4, the Levite, the husband of the woman who was murdered, answered and said, my concubine and I went into Gibeah, which belongs to Benjamin, to spend the night. And the men of Gibeah rose against me and surrounded the house at night because of me. They intended to kill me, but instead they raped my concubine so that she died. So I took hold of my concubine, cut her in pieces, and sent her throughout all the territory of the inheritance of Israel, because they committed lewdness and outrage in Israel. Look, all of you are children of Israel. Give your advice and counsel here and now. So thinking back to chapter 19, it should be notable in this account by the Levite that he has somewhat taken some liberties in editing the account. First, he does not mention his servant nor the old man who was in the house who invited them in. Those two are left out of the story. And I think that's strategic on the part of the Levite. We'll see why in a moment. A big glaring thing that he leaves out is that he's the one who shoved his wife out the door that resulted in her getting raped and killed. At the very least, he is an accomplice. And of course, it should be fairly obvious of why he wouldn't want to divulge that detail, because he divulges that detail to the 400,000 soldiers who are arrayed and are ready for battle. They're going to turn some of that anger on him, and rightly so, because he's guilty here. He's not the only guilty party, but he is certainly a major guilty party. Next, he also says that the men of Gibeah were there to kill him, which is not entirely true. Now, the end result may have been his death, but their stated purpose was to sexually abuse and rape him. Still something that's evil, but a slight twist he's put on this story to twist the narrative in his favor. Next, in verse 5, you may have caught that I was emphasizing the personal pronouns that he was using. In verse 5, in his account, his central account of what happened, he refers to himself 4 times. He only refers to his wife twice. He has twice as much emphasis on he is the victim. And he mentions the men of Gibeah 3 times. His wife, who arguably here is the victim, is an afterthought. She's mentioned at the end after he emphasizes that the men of Gibeah came against me and surrounded the house at night because of me, and they intended to kill me, but instead they raped my concubine so that she died. Refers to her twice. His focus here is on himself, and he sees all of this as attack on himself. There's another subtle shift in here. In verse 5, when he refers to the men of Gibeah, the Hebrew word that he uses here to describe the men of Gibeah is Baal, which, of course, is sometimes used to refer to the god of the Canaanites, Baals. But it's also referring to people as a word that's translated as master, lord, or leader. So here, some of the translations of this verse into English translate it as, and the leaders of Gibeah rose up against me. The leading citizens of Gibeah rose up. He's making it sound as if official leaders and delegates of the city of Gibeah had it out for him, the Levite, the spiritual leader. But keep in mind, this is his description, and very clearly from his description, he is an unreliable witness at best, and most likely a liar. In chapter 19, when the men are described by the reliable narrator of the book of Judges, the word Baal is not used. The Hebrew word Belial is used, and that word means vile, worthless, perverted. So in chapter 19, the men are described as they really are. These worthless, vile, perverted hoodlums that live in Gibeah. Whereas here, the Levite is making it out as if the leaders representing the city of Gibeah are coming after him to kill him. It's a little bit twisted, his story here. And this is the story that galvanizes the Israelites to action. Now, there's some additional problems with that. Let's see. In Numbers 35:30. So Numbers 35:30. It says that whoever kills a person, the murderer shall be put to death on the testimony of witnesses. But one witness is not sufficient testimony against a person for the death penalty. God outlined in the law for the Israelites, one witness not enough for the death penalty. And we're going to see the Israelites rely on this one witness, the Levite, and that's it. Further in Deuteronomy 19, verses 15 to 21. One witness shall not rise against a man concerning any iniquity or any sin that he commits. By the mouth of 2 or 3 witnesses the matter shall be established. If a false witness rises against any man to testify against him of wrongdoing, then both men in the controversy shall stand before the Lord, before the priest, and the judges who serve in those days. And the judges shall make careful inquiry. And indeed, if the witness is a false witness who has testified falsely against his brother, then you shall do to him as he thought to have done to his brother. Now here, part of what the Levi is saying is correct. There were men in Gibeah who committed an absolute horrible crime that justice should be brought on those individuals. But it wasn't the leaders of the city. And he was an accomplice. I mentioned how in his account here, he doesn't mention the servant and the old man. I think that's strategic on his part, because there would be the second and third witness who would give witness to part of the Levite's account, but also would likely add the part about the Levite being the accomplice who shoved his wife out the door and gave her up to the men, and then who in the morning acted completely callously towards her, and then disgraced her body by cutting it up. Now he does add that, but he adds it in a way that it sounds like, well, that's the natural thing to do. It's not. It's not the natural thing for anybody to do. It's a horrible, disgraceful way to treat someone. We talked some about that last week. So here the Israelites are taking the witness of one individual who's unreliable at best and most likely a liar, and then additionally they're completely ignoring God's instruction that they should be considering this carefully, they should be investigating this carefully, they should be looking for multiple witnesses. I think this is the other reason why the Levite wanted to make it sound like it was the city of Gibeah that was against him, not some individuals. That would make it more likely, well, the woman's dead, so she can't testify. So the Israelites, well, he's the only one who we can rely on because the entire city of Gibeah is corrupt, which they very well may be. But they didn't do their due diligence in determining that. And they did not attempt to find any additional witnesses. Instead, the response in verse 8 is, so all the people arose as one man, saying, none of us will go to his tent, nor will any turn back to his house. But now this is a thing which we will do to Gibeah. Already the Levi has shifted them from going after the vile, perverted men who committed this to the entire city of Gibeah. They also haven't consulted God. They have decided to make a very decisive action here against an entire city, and they have not consulted God yet. They have already pulled together an army of 400,000 people, and they have also made this foolish oath that none of them are going home until they've dealt with Gibeah. So continuing on in verse 10. So the logistics of this. We will take 10 men out of every 100 throughout all the tribes of Israel, 100 out of every 1,000, and 1,000 out of every 10,000, to make provisions for the people, that when they come to Gibeah and Benjamin, they may repay all the vileness that has been done to Israel. Well, the logistics here, why is this here? Well, basically, for every 10 people, they're choosing one person who will provide supplies. Because in a military conquest, you need individuals who are fighting, but you also need individuals to provide provisions to the soldiers. But why is that important here? They're gearing up for a big battle. They're gearing up for a long battle. You don't need this many provisions if you're just going and arresting and dealing with the small group of men who perpetrated the crime to begin with. They've already decided this is going to involve a lot of time, a lot of effort, a lot of killing, and we need to make sure we're playing for it. We don't mobilize this big of an army on empty stomachs. They are in this for the long haul. So all the men of Israel gathered against the city, united together as one man. Sadly, this is probably the only time in the book of Judges we see this level of unity among the Israelites against an enemy. When they came up against all the other enemies, there was not this level of unity. We have in Deborah's poem some of the tribes being complimented and blessed for their involvement and help. Others are called out for not helping. When Gideon goes against the Midianites, part of the aftermath of that is the Ephraimites come to Gideon and are angry with him because he didn't include them. And then with Jephthah, the Ephraimites do the same thing and are angry with Jephthah to the point they threaten to burn his house. And the result of that is Jephthah turns on the Ephraimites and kills 42,000 of them. Even when we've seen other judges successful against outside oppression, there's also been this disunity among the Israelites. If you go back to Joshua's last time that he called the people together unified, he stressed to them, you need to help each other. You need to work together as a unit. Those of you who are on the far side of the Jordan have to come and help. You can't stay over there in your safety. And we see everything but that, except now they're galvanized together as unity at the wrong time. If they had been more unified to begin with, this probably would not have happened at all. So verse 12, then the tribes of Israel sent men through all the tribe of Benjamin, saying, what is this wickedness that has occurred among you? Now therefore, deliver up the men, the perverted men who are in Gibeah, that we may put them to death and remove the evil from Israel. This is the right thing to do here. They've sent messengers to Benjamin, and it said, look, there's evil men among you, send them out. There's a problem with this, though. Even though it's the right thing to do, it's a good thing to do, it's done in the wrong order. It's already very clear to the tribe of Benjamin that Israel has amassed a 400,000 person army aimed at them and Gibeah, who's a Benjamite city. They've already decided they're going to destroy Gibeah, the entire city, not just the men who were involved with the crime. And there's no way with a 400,000 member army amassed there in Benjamite territory that the Benjamite have not had spies that they know this. And now Israel comes to them and give up these men. The order's all wrong. This is where they should have started. And not only that, along with that, they should start with maybe a trial based on more than one witness. Here they're going to Benjamin and they're already saying, we found these men guilty. We've got an army, by the way, that we're going to wipe all of you out. Give them to us. They've escalated the situation. They've put Benjamin into a situation that's not good. So their approach is wrong. Now, Benjamin's response, sadly, is also very wrong. There is no right side and wrong side here. There's a lot of wrong sides. But the children of Benjamin would not listen to the voice of their brethren, the children of Israel. Instead, the children of Benjamin gathered together from their cities to Gibeah to go to battle against the children of Israel. And from their cities at that time, the children of Benjamin numbered 26,000 men who drew the sword, besides the inhabitants of Gibeah, who numbered 700 select men. Among all the people were 700 select men who were left-handed. Everyone could sling a stone at the hair's breadth and not miss. Now, besides Benjamin, the men of Israel numbered 400,000 who drew the sword, All of these were men of war. So Benjamin's response is wrong in that they don't call Israel back to God. They don't try to root out. Instead, they rally around the city of Gibeah with over 26,000 soldiers, some from Gibeah. And they specifically mention here 700 select men who were left-handed. Benjamin, son of my right hand. We've seen this before. In the account of Ehud, Benjamin, he was from the tribe of Benjamin. Ehud, son of my right hand. Benjamin was a left-handed man. Now, the words that are used to describe in both cases are very likely an individual who was not born left-handed, but rather an individual who at a very young age, the right hand was bound so they couldn't use it. That forced them to learn and train to use their left hand to make them, when their right hand was unbound at an older age, to be essentially ambidextrous with a preference to their left hand. The advantages of this were many in battle. Cities were laid out and fortified to defend against soldiers who were primarily right-handed. When swordsmen sparred and fought, they typically sparred and practiced against other right-handed individuals. They're then fighting a swordsman who's left-handed. They're going to open themselves up more easily to being cut down. And that left-handed individual would have plenty of practice against right-handers because the predominance would be right-handed. Now, in this case, it specifically mentions left-handed slingers. Well, slingers were the artillery of the day. Now, we might think of a slingshot as being, this small little weapon to kill birds or whatever. That is not the case. It was a formidable weapon of artillery at that time. A skilled slinger would throw a rock or a clay projectile that was molded that weighed close to a pound at 100 miles an hour. And these are slingers who could throw a stone at a hair's breadth and not miss. They have deadly accuracy. This is like a major league pitcher who's throwing a baseball at you at 100 miles an hour, but he's not going for the strike zone. He's going for that hair in your head. And it's going to leave a mark. Now, the problem, though, is an individual who has a sling cannot use a shield because the shield gets in the way of the use of the sling. A right-handed swordsman, a right-handed slinger can't work together because the slinger is going to be either having to step out from the shield that the swordsman's holding in his left hand or hitting the swordsman's shield with the sling. But a left-handed slinger can use the shield that the right-handed swordsman buddy is holding and throw the sling. Same with archers. A left-handed archer could work with a right-handed swordsman. Similarly, a right-handed slinger could work with a left-handed swordsman. Benjamin was a tribe that was known for the fierceness of their fighters and their warriors in Israel. They were also known, as evidenced here in the account of Ehud, of a tribe that prepared their boys from a young age to have the skills to fight on a very high level. So despite the fact that Israel has the overwhelmingly large army here, Benjamin has the overwhelmingly better prepared army. David's mighty men were predominantly Benjamites. They had a reputation of their fierceness in battle, and the Israelites are going to see that here. So in verse 18, the children of Israel arose and went up to the house of God to inquire of God. Again, it sounds like a good thing, and it is a good thing, but their timing is all off. And what they ask God is all off. They say, which of us shall go up first to battle against the children of Benjamin? And the Lord said, Judah first. They've already decided their course of action before going to God. They really should have gone to God to make their course of action. What they're doing here is somewhat manipulative in that they've decided a course of action And now they're going to God and praying and not asking God, should we go up against the Benjamites? Should we find more witnesses? Should we follow your directions? No, they go up and say, basically to God, we're going to go fight Benjamin. Which of our tribes should go first? Kind of, we'll get God's blessing because we'll make him feel like he's part of the decision-making process here, even though we're just doing this on our own. This is manipulative. Now notice, God responds the same way that his response was when Joshua died. When Joshua died, and in Judges chapter 1, verses 1 to 2, when Joshua dies, the people go to God and say, who should go first? And God's response is Judah. Here it's the same response. God is consistent here. Now he does not say Judah should go first because he's given Judah victory. He's not saying because this is the right thing to do. He's just saying Judah's going first. At this point, keep in mind, Israel is oppressing themselves here. Both sides are in the wrong. And so because of it, God's hand of judgment is going to fall on both the Benjamites and the Israelites and Judah. So the children of Israel rose in the morning and encamped against Gibeah. And the men of Israel went out to battle against Benjamin, and the men of Israel put themselves in battle array to fight against them at Gibeah. Then the children of Benjamin came out of Gibeah, and on that day cut down to the ground 22,000 men of the Israelites. And the people, that is, the men of Israel, encouraged themselves and again formed the battle line at the place where they had put themselves in array on the first day. Then the children of Israel went up and wept before the Lord until evening and asked counsel to the Lord, saying, shall I again draw near for battle against the children of my brother Benjamin? Here it sounds like the Israelites are doing the right thing. They were defeated, they go to God. But that's not the order here. The order here is they're defeated, they lose 22,000. That means that Benjamin's army of 26,000, that's a pretty resounding rout. Not only that, from a battle tactic standpoint, Gibeah is a well-fortified city. The Benjamites don't stay in the fortification. They come out on the attack. They're so confident. That's how good these soldiers are. Imagine if Benjamin had used this soldier might against the Canaanites instead of against their brethren. Maybe Jerusalem wouldn't have been controlled by the Jebusites. Maybe the Levite would have stayed in Jerusalem, a safe city at that time. Kind of a side note here is very clearly there's Canaanite influence still in the land of Benjamin. It's not for lack of military might. If the Benjamites can have this decisive a victory against this army, they could have had that victory against the Canaanites. They didn't, likely because they were okay with the Canaanite influence. They liked the Canaanite influence. They adopted the Canaanite influence. It wasn't for a lack of military might, it was for a lack of effort. And their hearts being in the wrong place. But here, notice Israelites, 22,000 were killed, and their immediate response is not to go to God. Their immediate response is they set up for battle the next day. They've already taken a decisive action. They've set up exactly the same way. They're going to do exactly the same thing, and then they go to God. And this time they weep to show they're sincere. They're not. And so God says to them, go up against them. One might have the question, why is God sending them to be defeated? Well, because their heart is wrong. He's punishing them. Justice needs to be brought against them just as much as it is the Benjamites. So the children of Israel approached the children of Benjamin on the second day. And the Benjamin went out from Gibeah on the second day and cut down to the ground 18,000 more of the children of Israel. All these drew the sword. So second day, same thing. We're up to 40,000 casualties for the Israelites against an army that at most numbers 26,000. They recognize something's wrong, so they go back to God. And this time they pull out all the guns. Then all the children of Israel, that is, all the people, went up and came to the house of God. They wept. They sat before the Lord. They fasted that day until evening. They offered burnt offerings. They offered peace offerings. And so the children of Israel inquired of the Lord. The ark of the covenant of God was there. So you can pull out the ark. And Phinehas, the son of Eleazar, the son of Aaron, stood before it in those days, saying, shall I yet again go out to battle against the children of my brother Benjamin, or shall I cease? So this time they even recruit a priest from the Aaronic line, from Aaron's lineage, as their spokesperson. Now in some ways this may seem good. It seems like they're finally getting their act together. But in the context here, it's more likely that they've decided their first two appeals didn't work, so they are going to appeal to a greater level of ritualism by weeping, by fasting, by sin offerings, by burnt offerings, by trotting out the ark, by getting a priest who's got a lineage, he's a descendant of Aaron, as their spokesperson. And then they inquire, should we go up or should we cease? The question has changed slightly, so they've grown a little bit. But they're still trying to manipulate God rather than having a really heartfelt contrition before God. Compare this to how Joshua approached God. It's very different. This is one of the clues also that these events happen towards the beginning of Judges, the fact that Phinehas, the son of Eleazar, the son of Aaron, is still alive. Unless a condensed genealogy here, he's likely, it's got to be towards the beginning of Judges. So they pull out all the stops here. And the Lord says, go up tomorrow, I will deliver them into your hands. So the third time, God does tell them he's going to give them victory. I don't think it's because of their heart condition. There's some other clues further on, but I don't think it's because of their heart condition. I think it's because at this point, keep in mind, God is bringing judgment on all of Israel, not just Judah, not just the Israelites, but Benjamin also. It's Benjamin's turn to face the wrath of God here. Then the Israel set men in ambush all around Gibeah. So this is the same tactic that Abimelech took against Shechem. And the children of Israel went up against the children of Benjamin on the third day and put themselves in battle array against Gibeah as at the other times. So the children of Benjamin went out against the people and were drawn away from the city. They began to strike down and kill some of the people as at the other times. In the highways, one of which goes up to Bethel and the other to Gibeah. And in the field, about 30 men of Israel died. And the children of Benjamin said, they are defeated before us as at first. But the children of Israel said, let us flee and draw away from the city to the highway. So all the men of Israel rose from their place and put themselves in battle array at Baal Tamar. Then Israel's men in ambush burst forth from their position in the plains of Geba. And 10,000 select men from all Israel came against Gibeah, and the battle was fierce. But the Benjamites did not know the disaster was upon them. The Lord defeated Benjamin before Israel. And the children of Israel destroyed that day 25,100 Benjamites. All these drew the sword. So this time Israel sets up this ambush where they cut off the Benjamites from the city, they destroy the city of Gibeah, and destroy the Benjamites by basically encircling them. And the next verses, 36 to 48, expand on this and give additional details of how this happened and what specifically happened. I think I'm going to leave that for next week, and I'm going to just skip to but the final verse here, 47 and 48, and then I'll close with a few comments. So chapter 20, verses 47. But 600 men turned and fled toward the wilderness to the rock of Rimmon. And they stayed at the rock of Rimmon for 4 months. And the men of Israel turned back against the children of Benjamin and struck them down with the edge of the sword from every city, men and beast, all who were found. They also set fire to all the cities they came to. So not only did the Israelites defeat the Benjamites, they also then turned their attention, once there was only 600 Benjamite soldiers left in the mountains, they turned their attention on the cities, and they killed all of the people. Women, children, men who were not in the military. They wiped them all out. They wiped the livestock out. They burned the cities. Once they had defeated, they then completely wiped out. Now, certainly, the evil, vile, perverted men of Gibeah should have been punished for their sin. But the principle in the Old Testament of an eye for an eye has not been carried out here. The Israelites have over-exceeded that. The principle of an eye for an eye is that punishment fits the crime. Taking a person who steals a loaf of bread and cutting their hand off, that's a violation of the eye for an eye principle, because a loaf of bread and a hand are not equal. The eye for the eye isn't this brutal vengeance. It's about justice. And here, the Israelites are treating their brother Benjamin in the same way that God commanded the Israelites to treat the Canaanites. Because God did specifically in Deuteronomy 7 and 20 command Israel to utterly destroy the Canaanites. Men, women, children, livestock, cities, everything. There were 3 reasons for this. Justice for the evil that permeated Canaanite culture. But it was also to keep Israel uncontaminated. It was also to fulfill the covenant promise of the land to Israel. Additionally, this command to utterly destroy them was a specific command directed at specific nations. It was not a general principle that Israel was to apply anytime they wanted to when somebody stood against them. They were not to apply this to Benjamin. Now, certainly, justice needed to be carried out against Benjamin, but this is not justice. This is vengeance driven by this immoral Levite who was self-centered, who unified them and just tore them apart. So what's wrong with this picture? God's people rally to the wrong leader, an immoral Levite. God's instructions are ignored in investigating crimes, and they only pay attention to one witness and do no further investigation. God's people making decisions and then consulting God, manipulate God to get them on his side. We should start by asking God for counsel and make decisions based on that, not the other way around. God's people acting worse than the world. So in some ways, it seems appropriate that the Benjamites would have been treated like the Canaanites and utterly destroyed, except the problem is the Benjamites were part of God's chosen people who God promised they would have a lineage, so they cannot be wiped out. What does this tell us about God? God allows his people to face the consequences of sin. Here, when the Israelites are asking, should we go up against Benjamin, and they were defeated twice with the loss of 40,000 soldiers, that was the consequences of sin that God allowed them to face. And God sometimes gives what his people ask for as discipline to his people. The people here were asking for the wrong things, and God gave it to him. And they were asking for the wrong things because they came up with decisions first and then consulted God, rather than consulting God and coming up with an action. Next week, we're going to finish out some additional details in chapter 20 and then get into chapter 21. If you'd like, also read Joshua chapter 7, because I want to pull out some parallels between Joshua chapter 7 and the events that are going on here. There's some similarities there. And interestingly enough, the passage of John Laurie that I saw him putting up is somewhat a New Testament application of dealing with sin in a right way rather than this brutal way. Steve, could I get you to close in prayer?